The floating laboratories of Virex Prime hung suspended in the perpetual twilight, their crystalline structures defying gravity through fields of pure energy. Below them, the molten mineral seas churned and bubbled, releasing phosphorescent vapors that painted the sky in hues of violet and amber. Within Laboratory Complex 7, Dr. Sela Arkoth manipulated streams of quantum particles with practiced precision, her 4 elongated fingers dancing through holographic control interfaces without ever touching a physical surface. The Virexians had evolved beyond the need for crude implements millennia ago. Their laboratories were marvels of automation, where thoughts could be translated directly into material reality through quantum manipulators and energy-weaving arrays. Physical tools were not merely obsolete, they were considered an affront to the purity of scientific advancement. In this world of theoretical perfection, even the concept of manual labor had been relegated to historical archives, studied only as a curiosity of their primitive past. Dr. Sela Arkoth stood at the apex of her civilization's scientific achievement. Her research into matter synthesis through pure energy fields had earned her recognition across 17 star systems. She moved through her laboratory with the grace of one who had never known physical exertion, her pale, elongated form perfectly adapted to a life of cerebral pursuits. The very idea of touching raw materials with her bare hands would have been as foreign to her as breathing underwater. The energy matrices are aligned to within 0.003% of theoretical perfection, Sela announced to her research team, her voice carrying the melodious tones characteristic of the Virexian upper scientific caste. Her large, multifaceted eyes reflected the dancing lights of the quantum field she was manipulating. Today, we shall achieve what our ancestors could only dream of, the creation of complex molecular structures from pure energy alone, Dr. Pernval observed from his position near the secondary control array. Unlike Sela, whose youth and brilliance shone with an almost aggressive intensity, Pern carried the weight of centuries. His skin bore the subtle luminescent patterns that marked him as one of the elder researchers, though his ideas had grown increasingly radical with age, where others saw perfection in their automated existence. Pern had begun to perceive vulnerability, remarkable precision. Sela, Pern commented, though his tone carried an undercurrent of concern that his younger colleague failed to detect. Though I wonder if we might benefit from maintaining some redundancy in our systems. The ancient texts speak of backup procedures that our ancestors employed. Sela's laugh tinkled like crystal chimes. Backup procedures? You mean the primitive practice of maintaining physical alternatives to our quantum systems? Really? Pern, I sometimes wonder if age hasn't made you overly nostalgic. We have transcended such crude necessities. Our fabricators are self-maintaining, self-repairing, and connected to the central intelligence network. What possible failure could require us to regress to manual intervention? Pern's response was cut short by an alert from the perimeter sensors. A human envoy had arrived at the laboratory complex, requesting entry. The very presence of a human on Virex Prime was unusual enough to draw curious glances from the research team. Humans, with their bizarre insistence on maintaining physical capabilities alongside their technological advancement, were viewed by most Virexians as an evolutionary curiosity, a species that had somehow achieved interstellar travel without fully abandoning their primitive roots. Captain Mara Kincaid stood in the decontamination chamber, enduring the complex entry procedures with patient good humor. At 19 Earth years, she was young even by human standards for such a diplomatic posting, but her expertise in comparative xenotechnology had earned her this assignment. Unlike the flowing, ethereal forms of the Virexians, Mara was compact and solid, her body shaped by a lifetime of physical activity on worlds where survival often depended on more than just intellectual prowess. Her equipment pack, secured to her back, contained an assortment of items that would have seemed absurdly primitive to her hosts: rope, metal tools, a medical kit with actual bandages, and tucked into a side pocket, a small leather pouch containing flint and steel, a gift from her grandmother. who had insisted that the old ways should never be forgotten, no matter how far humanity reached into the stars. "Captain Kincaid?" Sela greeted her with the formal bow prescribed by diplomatic protocol, though her tone suggested she found the interaction somewhat beneath her. "We are honored by your visit, though I confess I am uncertain what insights human science might offer to our current research. We are attempting to achieve matter synthesis at the quantum level, a field that requires precision beyond what manual manipulation could ever achieve." Mara smiled, unperturbed by the subtle condescension. "Dr. Arkoth, I'm here to observe and learn. Every species has developed unique approaches to understanding the universe. Sometimes the most valuable discoveries come from unexpected combinations of different perspectives." "A charmingly optimistic view," Sela replied, turning back to her controls. "You are welcome to observe, though I doubt you will find much that translates to human methodologies. Now, if you will excuse me, we are about to initiate a critical phase of our experiment." The laboratory hummed with increasing intensity as Sela initiated the matter synthesis sequence. Energy fields flickered and danced, forming complex patterns that seemed to bend reality itself. For several minutes, everything proceeded according to the theoretical models. Particles began to coalesce from pure energy, forming the basic building blocks of matter. Then, without warning, the primary control interface flickered and went dark. "System diagnostic," Sela commanded, her voice maintaining its calm despite the sudden interruption. The laboratory's ambient lighting dimmed as backup power redistributed itself. "Central Intelligence, report status of Energy Weaving Array 77 Alpha." The response came not from the expected artificial intelligence, but from a junior researcher near the communication panel. "Dr. Arkoth, we're experiencing a complete severance from the Central Intelligence Network. It appears to be a software authentication failure. The fabricator units are requesting proprietary updates that require bureaucratic clearance from the Science Council." Sela's composed demeanor cracked slightly. "That's impossible. The fabricators are designed to be self-sufficient. How long until the clearance can be obtained?" "Given the current political review of all quantum manipulation research, perhaps 7 to 10 cycles." The silence that followed was profound. Without the fabricators, the laboratory's self-maintaining systems would begin to degrade within days. More immediately, the half-formed matter in the synthesis chamber would destabilize without constant energy input, potentially causing a cascade failure that could damage the entire facility. "There must be an alternative," Sela insisted, her fingers dancing uselessly over the dead control interface. "The theoretical framework is sound. We simply need to manually adjust the energy flow," Pern suggested quietly. "If we could somehow generate a controlled energy pulse to restart the initialization sequence." "Manually?" Sela's tone conveyed both horror and disbelief. "With what? Our bodies aren't designed for such crude interaction with raw energy fields. We have no tools, no mechanisms that aren't dependent on the fabricator network." It was then that Mara stepped forward, her hand moving unconsciously to the pack on her back. "Excuse me, but did you say you need to generate an energy pulse? Something to create a spark in your system?" Sela turned to her with barely concealed irritation. "Captain Kincaid, while I appreciate your interest, this is a complex quantum mechanical problem that requires—" "Fire," Mara interrupted gently. "You need to create fire, energy from a chemical reaction, heat and light from rapid oxidation." She was already reaching into her pack, pulling out the small leather pouch. "On Earth, we have a saying. Sometimes the oldest solutions are the most reliable." The Virexian scientists watched in fascination and bewilderment as Mara emptied the pouch onto a clear section of the laboratory floor. The flint and steel seemed almost absurdly primitive in the high-tech environment, like finding a stone axe in a starship. "This is flint," Mara explained, holding up the sharp-edged stone. "And this is steel, When struck together at the right angle, they create sparks, tiny fragments of heated metal that can ignite combustible material. She looked around the laboratory. Do you have any fibrous plant material? Something dry that could serve as tinder? Pern was the first to respond, his aged eyes bright with sudden interest. The hydroponic gardens produce a fibrous waste product from the nutrient filters. It's considered biological refuse, but, Perfect, Mara said. Could someone bring me some? The next few minutes passed in surreal slow motion for the Virexian scientists. They watched as Mara arranged the plant fibers into a small nest, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. She positioned herself carefully, holding the flint at an angle above the tinder, the steel striker ready in her other hand. The key, she explained, aware that she had become the center of intense scrutiny, is to strike at the right angle with sufficient force. The friction shaves off tiny pieces of steel, and the energy from the impact heats them to incandescence. She demonstrated with a swift, confident motion. Sparks cascaded onto the tinder, most dying instantly, but she continued with patient persistence. Within 30 seconds, a tiny ember caught in the plant fibers. Mara leaned down, blowing gently to feed oxygen to the nascent flame. The reaction in the laboratory was immediate and dramatic. Several scientists stepped back in alarm as actual fire, not a holographic simulation or energy field approximation, but real, chemical fire, bloomed to life on their sterile floor. Others pressed closer, their large eyes reflecting the dancing flames with an expression approaching wonder. Incredible, Pern breathed. The efficiency, the simplicity. It requires no external power source, no network connection, no authorization protocols. It's primitive, Sella countered, though her voice lacked its earlier certainty. Uncontrolled chemical oxidation. The heat output is chaotic, the byproducts potentially toxic. How could this possibly help with our quantum synthesis problem? Mara carefully fed the small fire with additional plant fibers, maintaining it at a manageable size. Sometimes, Dr. Arkoth, the solution isn't about perfection, it's about adaptability. Your ancestors must have discovered fire before they developed quantum manipulation. Every advancement builds on what came before. But we've evolved beyond such crude methods, Sala insisted. To regress to using fire would be to admit that our entire civilization's approach is incomplete. Pern finished gently. Not wrong. Sela, simply incomplete. We've become so specialized, so dependent on our advanced systems, that we've lost the ability to function when those systems fail. The philosophical debate might have continued indefinitely, but it was interrupted by a new alarm, this one far more urgent than the earlier system failure. The half-stabilized matter in the synthesis chamber had begun to decay, its quantum state fluctuating wildly without the controlling influence of the energy-weaving array. Containment breach imminent, one of the junior researchers announced. Panic creeping into their melodious voice. The chamber's magnetic fields are failing. If the synthesized matter comes into contact with the raw energy feeds, it will create a cascade reaction. Sela finished, her face paling to an almost translucent shade. The entire laboratory could be flooded with molten minerals from the sea below. Central Intelligence would normally engage emergency protocols, but without the network connection. We need to manually seal the breach, Mara said, already assessing the situation with the practical eye of someone trained for emergencies. What materials do you have that could withstand the heat and pressure? Nothing. Sela's composure finally shattered completely. Don't you understand? Everything in this laboratory is designed to be shaped and manipulated by our fabricators. We have no manual tools, no way to physically interact with raw materials without the quantum manipulators. Mara's eyes swept the laboratory, taking in details the panicking scientists overlooked. Her gaze settled on a stack of spare panel components near the damaged synthesis chamber, sheets of a metallic composite that appeared similar to steel but with an iridescent sheen that suggested alien manufacturing. "Those panels," she said, pointing. "What are they made of?" "Triphase carbide composite," Pern answered, following her gaze. "But they're precisely calibrated for specific installations, without fabricators to shape them." Mara was already moving, pulling more items from her pack. A multi-tool emerged, its various implements gleaming in the light of the still-burning fire. "On human colonies, we learn to make do with what we have. Dr. Val, I need you to help me understand the exact size and shape of the breach. Dr. Arkoth, those mineral seas below us, at what temperature do they solidify?" "Approximately 900 degrees Celsius," Sela answered automatically, her scientific training overcoming her shock. "But the application would need to be precise. The cooling rate controlled." "Then we'll have to be precise," Mara said simply. She turned to the junior researchers who had been watching in stunned silence. "I need someone to collect samples of the mineral vapor condensing on the lower observation ports. Use whatever containers you can find. We're going to create a primitive welding paste." The next few minutes were a chaos of activity unlike anything Laboratory Complex 7 had ever seen. Virexian scientists, who had never in their lives performed manual labor, found themselves following the human envoy's rapid-fire instructions. They gathered materials, held panels in place, and watched in amazement as Mara used her tools to score and shape the carbide composite with nothing but physical strength and basic mechanical advantage. The fire she had created proved crucial to the operation. Mara used a piece of twisted plant fiber as a primitive torch, heating the collected mineral condensate until it reached a malleable consistency. The paste glowed with an eerie phosphorescence as she spread it along the edges of the cut panel, working with swift, economical movements. "The breach is widening," someone called out. 30 seconds until critical failure." "Almost there," Mara muttered, sweat beading on her forehead from the intense heat. The Virexians watched her hands, those strange, small, 5-fingered appendages that seemed so clumsy compared to their own elongated digits, work with a precision born of necessity rather than evolution. She pressed the panel against the breach, holding it in place as the mineral paste began to cool and harden. The seal formed slowly, fighting against the pressure from within the chamber. For several heart-stopping seconds, it seemed the improvised patch might not hold. Then, with a grinding sound that spoke of immense forces barely contained, the breach stabilized. The alarms continued for another moment before sensors registered the containment and an eerie silence fell over the laboratory. Mara stepped back, her hands slightly burned from the heat, her face flushed with exertion. Around her, the Virexian scientists stood in various poses of shock, awe, and contemplation. The small fire still burned on the laboratory floor, its light casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock the sterile perfection of their surroundings. "Impossible," Sela whispered, but there was something new in her voice. Not denial, but rather the tone of a scientist confronting evidence that challenged fundamental assumptions. "You used primitive tools and random materials to achieve what our most advanced systems could not. The theoretical framework suggests this should not have worked." "That's the thing about theory," Mara said, wincing slightly as she examined her burnt hands. "It's only as good as its ability to predict and adapt to reality. Your frameworks aren't wrong, Dr. Arkoth. They're just limited to ideal conditions." Pern moved forward, his aged hands trembling slightly as he reached toward the improvised seal. "May I?" he asked Mara, who nodded. His fingers traced the rough edge where mineral paste had hardened into an imperfect but functional barrier. "Centuries," he murmured. "For centuries, we've prided ourselves on transcending the need for such crude solutions. We've built a civilization on the principle that manual labor is beneath us, that only pure thought and energy manipulation represent true advancement. And look where it's brought us," one of the junior researchers added, emboldened by the break in normal hierarchy. One software failure, and we nearly lost the entire facility. Sela stood silent for a long moment, her multifaceted eyes reflecting both the dying flames of Mara's fire and the soft glow of the laboratory's restored lighting. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a quality that none of her colleagues had heard before: humility. "Captain Kincaid," she began formally, then paused and started again. "Mara, I owe you an apology, and more than that, I owe you a debt of understanding. I've spent my entire career believing that sophistication meant abandoning all connections to our primitive past. But what you've shown us today—" "What she's shown us," Pern interjected gently, "is that true sophistication lies not in abandoning our past, but in integrating it with our present. Every tool, from the simplest stone to the most complex quantum manipulator, has its place in the spectrum of problem-solving." Mara smiled, sitting down carefully on one of the laboratory's pristine benches. "On Earth, we have museums dedicated to preserving ancient technologies, not because we expect to need them daily, but because understanding how our ancestors solved problems helps us think more creatively about our current challenges. Sometimes the best solution to a quantum problem might just be hitting it with a rock." Despite the tension of recent events, several of the Virexians produced sounds that might have been laughter, a tinkling, crystalline noise that filled the laboratory with unexpected warmth. "There's something else," Mara continued, her expression growing more serious. "Your civilization has achieved incredible things. The technology here, the theoretical frameworks you've developed, they're beyond anything humanity has achieved. But strength isn't just about what you can do when everything works perfectly. It's about what you can do when everything falls apart." Sela moved to one of the undamaged control panels, her fingers hovering over the interface without touching it. "The synthesis experiment," she said quietly. "It's ruined. Of course, months of preparation lost because we couldn't adapt when our tools failed." She turned to face the assembled group. "I motion that we establish a new research directive, not to abandon our current methods, but to expand them." "What do you propose?" Pern asked, though his slight smile suggested he already knew the answer. "A comprehensive study of what you call primitive technologies," Sela announced. "Understanding not just their historical significance, but their practical applications. If Captain Kincaid is willing, perhaps she could provide initial guidance." Mara's grin was answer enough, but she nodded formally. "I'd be honored. Though I should warn you, learning to use physical tools when you're not accustomed to it can be frustrating. You'll probably burn yourselves, cut yourselves, and make a lot of mistakes." "Mistakes?" Pern repeated thoughtfully. "Another concept we've tried to eliminate from our civilization. Perhaps that, too, has been an error." Over the following days, Laboratory Complex 7 underwent a transformation that would have been unthinkable before Mara's arrival. The pristine spaces remained, but they were now supplemented by workshops where Virexian scientists learned to handle physical tools. The first attempts were, as Mara had predicted, disasters. Elongated fingers designed for manipulating energy fields struggled with hammers and pliers. More than one researcher discovered that fire, while useful, was also indiscriminately hungry. But they persisted, driven by a combination of scientific curiosity and newfound humility. Sela proved to be one of the most dedicated students, approaching each new manual skill with the same intensity she had previously reserved for quantum mechanics. Under Mara's patient instruction, she learned to strike flint and steel, to shape metal with basic tools, and to see the elegance in solutions that required sweat and effort rather than just thought. The change was not without controversy. Other laboratory complexes sent delegations to observe and, in many cases, to criticize. The Science Council convened emergency sessions to debate whether allowing primitive technologies into their research facilities represented progress or regression. Some argued that Sela and her team had been contaminated by human influence, that they were betraying everything Virexian civilization stood for. But the results spoke louder than any philosophical argument. When other facilities experienced similar network failures, and it turned out that software authentication issues were more common than anyone had admitted, Laboratory Complex 7 was able to continue its research with minimal interruption. They developed hybrid approaches that combined quantum manipulation with physical backup systems. Manual overrides were installed alongside automated systems, and every researcher was required to demonstrate basic proficiency with at least 3 non-powered tools. Perhaps more importantly, the change in perspective led to unexpected breakthroughs. By understanding the physical principles behind primitive technologies, Virexian scientists developed new theoretical frameworks that had been invisible to them before. The act of manually shaping matter gave them insights into molecular structure that pure energy manipulation had never revealed. The chaos and unpredictability of fire led to new understandings of entropy and system dynamics. Pern, granted new authority as director of the Integrated Technologies Initiative, established exchange programs with human colonies. Young Virexian scientists traveled to worlds where survival still sometimes depended on the ability to start a fire or shape metal by hand. They returned with calloused hands, a shocking sight in Virexian society, and minds expanded by the experience. Meanwhile, human scientists came to Virex Prime to study technologies that seemed like magic to their physics. The collaboration led to innovations neither species could have achieved alone. Energy fields that could be controlled by simple mechanical switches, quantum computers with manual backup calculation systems, and fabricators that could produce both sophisticated components and basic hand tools with equal efficiency. Mara's assignment to Virex Prime was extended indefinitely at the request of the Science Council. She established a permanent demonstration center in Laboratory Complex 7, where visitors could learn everything from fire starting to quantum field manipulation. The center's symbol, displayed prominently at its entrance, was a holographic image of flame and quantum particles intertwined, chaos and order in eternal dance. On the day of the center's official opening, Sela stood before an assembly of scientists from dozens of worlds. She had changed in the months since that first crisis. Her movements showed a confidence that came from physical as well as mental capability, and her hands bore the faint marks of small scars from her early attempts at metalworking. "We stand at a crossroads," she began, her voice carrying across the vast auditorium. "For too long, we believed that advancement meant leaving behind everything that came before. We saw our evolution from physical to purely mental beings as a straight line, always moving forward, never looking back. But progress isn't a line, it's a spiral. We move forward by carrying with us the lessons of the past, transformed and integrated into new understanding." She gestured to Mara, who stood among the assembled dignitaries. "A young human showed us what we had forgotten. That wisdom lies not in discarding tools because they are old, but in understanding why they worked and how they might work again. Every civilization faces moments when its greatest strengths become its greatest weaknesses. Our mastery of energy and theory had made us powerful, but our abandonment of physical capability had made us fragile." The audience listened in rapt attention as Sela continued. "Today, we celebrate not just a new research facility, but a new philosophy. We call it adaptive integration, the principle that true advancement comes from combining all available tools and methods, regardless of their origin or age, from the smallest spark to the grandest quantum field. Every technique has its place in the pursuit of knowledge." She paused, reaching into a pocket of her research robes, itself a new addition, as traditional Virexian clothing had no need for storage compartments. She withdrew a small leather pouch, identical to the one Mara had carried. "Captain Kincaid presented me with this gift last week," Sela said, holding up the pouch. "Flint and steel, crafted on Earth and carried across the stars. Some might see it as a primitive curiosity, a reminder of what we've transcended. But I see it differently. I see it as a symbol of humility, adaptability, and the courage to admit that our ancestors' solutions might still have relevance in our quantum age. She demonstrated the technique Mara had taught her, striking sparks with practiced ease. The tiny points of light arced through the air, visible even in the bright auditorium. These sparks, Sela concluded, represent more than just oxidizing metal. They represent the spark of curiosity that drives all scientific advancement. They represent the moment when we chose to expand our understanding rather than limit it. And they represent the bridge between what we were, what we are, and what we might become. The applause that followed was unlike traditional Virexian expressions of approval. It included not just the crystalline tones of their voices, but also the physical sound of hands coming together. Another human custom that had been adapted and integrated. As the ceremony concluded, and scientists from various worlds mingled in the demonstration areas, Pern found himself standing beside Mara at one of the workshop stations. Young Virexians were learning to forge simple tools, their elongated fingers gradually adapting to the unfamiliar motions. "Do you think they understand what they're really learning?" Mara asked, watching a student successfully shape a piece of heated metal for the first time. Pern's aged face crinkled in what had become his version of a smile. "They're learning that there's no shame in simplicity, no weakness in maintaining connections to our origins, but more than that, they're learning that true strength comes from being able to solve problems at any level of complexity." He paused, watching the student's triumph. "Your people have a saying, I believe, about teaching someone to fish?" Mara laughed. "Give someone a fish, and you feed them for a day. Teach them to fish, and you feed them for a lifetime." "An elegant philosophy," Pern agreed. "Though I would propose a modification for our current situation. Teach a civilization to rely only on automated fishing systems, and they thrive until the system fails. Teach them to fish with both quantum nets and simple hooks, and they thrive regardless of circumstances." Their conversation was interrupted by an alert from the main laboratory. Another synthesis experiment was beginning, but this time with a crucial difference. Alongside the quantum manipulators and energy fields, manual backup systems stood ready. Physical tools waited in easy reach of the researchers. And in a place of honor on the main control panel, a small flame burned in a specially designed containment field, not for any practical purpose, but as a reminder of the day everything changed. Months turned to years, and the transformation that had begun in Laboratory Complex 7 spread throughout Virexian society. It wasn't without resistance or setbacks. Many older scientists never fully adapted to the new paradigm, and there were accidents as inexperienced hands learned to work with physical materials. But gradually, a new generation arose, one that saw no contradiction between quantum mastery and manual skill. These young Virexians created wonders that amazed both their own species and their human collaborators. They developed energy fields that could be fine-tuned with mechanical dials, achieving precision through the marriage of digital and analog control. They built fabricators that could teach as well as create, guiding users through the physical principles behind each construction. They even created new forms of art that combined light sculpture with physical media, beauty born from the intersection of the ethereal and the tangible. Sela, now recognized as one of the leading philosophers of the adaptive integration movement, often reflected on that first crisis. In her private laboratory, a space that now included both quantum chambers and a traditional workshop, she would sometimes light a fire using the flint and steel Mara had given her, not because she needed the flame, but because the act itself had become a form of meditation. The sparks that flew from steel and stone reminded her that innovation often came from friction, from the meeting of different materials and ideas. The small flame that resulted spoke of potential, dangerous if uncontrolled, but invaluable when properly channeled. And the warmth it provided was no less real for being produced by ancient means rather than modern energy fields. One evening, as Virex Prime's binary suns passed beyond the churning mineral seas, Sela received a message from Mara. The human captain was returning for another visit. this time bringing a delegation of young humans who wanted to study Virexian science. But there was a personal note attached to the official communication. "Sailor, I'm bringing something special, a traditional earth forge, small enough to fit in your workshop. I thought you might enjoy learning blacksmithing the way humans did it for thousands of years. Fair warning, it's hot, dirty, exhausting work. You'll love it, Sella's laugh echoed through her laboratory, that crystalline sound now tinged with warm humanity. She looked at her hands, once pristine and unused to labor, now marked with the small scars and calluses that spoke of experience across the full spectrum of creation. They were still the hands of a scientist, but now they were also the hands of a maker, a crafter, a being who understood that true mastery came not from transcending physical reality, but from engaging with it at every level. As she prepared for Mara's arrival, Sella drafted a response to the Science Council's latest request for a philosophical statement on the adaptive integration movement. She wrote not with voice-activated systems or thought transcription interfaces, but with a simple stylus on reactive parchment, another human innovation that the Virexians had adapted. The physical act of writing, she had discovered, created a different kind of connection between thought and expression. "The greatest civilizations," she wrote, "are not those that have traveled the farthest from their origins, but those that have learned to carry their entire history with them into the future. Every tool we have ever created, from the first shaped stone to the most sophisticated quantum manipulator, represents a solution to a problem. To discard any of these solutions is to deliberately limit our ability to face future challenges. We are not lessened by acknowledging that fire still burns, that metal can still be shaped by force, that sometimes the simplest answer is the best answer. We are strengthened by it. For in the marriage of the primitive and the advanced, the physical and the theoretical, the ancient and the modern, we find not just survival, but wisdom. Let the spark that saved Laboratory Complex 7 be remembered not as a moment of regression, but as the moment we chose to become whole. Let every Virexian who learns to strike flint and steel understand that they are not betraying their heritage, but fulfilling it for our ancestors, too. Once discovered fire, and in rediscovering it ourselves, we honor their journey while continuing our own. The universe does not care about the sophistication of our methods. It responds only to their effectiveness. And effectiveness, we have learned, comes from having every possible tool at our disposal and the wisdom to know which one to use. She signed the document with both her energy signature and a physical mark made with ink, another small symbol of integration. As the suns finally set and the phosphorescent glow of the mineral seas painted her laboratory in shifting colors, Sella felt a deep satisfaction. They had come so close to losing everything because of their rigid adherence to a single path of development. Now, with options as varied as the stars themselves, they were truly prepared for whatever challenges the universe might offer. The communication panel chimed softly, indicating an incoming message from another laboratory complex. They were experiencing a critical system failure and requesting assistance. Sella smiled as she prepared her response, already knowing what she would suggest they try first. After all, sometimes the best solution to the most complex problem was also the oldest, a truth written in sparks and flame. In the marriage of hand and mind, in the humility to admit that progress meant not leaving the past behind, but carrying it forward into an ever-brightening future. As she worked, the eternal dance continued outside her windows, the molten seas below, the crystalline structures above, and between them, beings who had learned that true civilization meant being equally at home with both the fire and the stars.